Well, good morning, everybody. It's Monday. At least we think it is. Well, actually, it isn't. It's Tuesday. It's a short week. I hope you all had a happy Memorial Day weekend. I did. I spent some time up on the Cape, where I hadn't been for a while. Spent some time talking with my wife, talking about differences that divided us and separated us for a while, and went about the business of trying to repair those divisions. Whether those discussions leak into the discussions at Law and Legitimacy, I certainly hope they do. I think that the politics of this country have obviously been very divisive, not just across social lines, but across some familial lines, and certainly within my family. My goal is to find a community in which we can all live, hopefully my wife and I together, and hopefully you and I together, and hopefully Mike and I together. Good morning, Michael. How are things in North Carolina?
Things are great here in North Carolina. We just completed potty training boot camp. My young man has shed the diapers, so we're on top down here.
Oh, wow.
We're up, as they say.
Is he what, 2 1/4 now?
No, he's 3. He is just late to the party. Didn't want to do it.
All right. Well, so I spent some time with the New York Times this weekend. Always a hazardous thing to do. On the other hand, it is a comprehensive newspaper, and one story caught my eye. And I thought it said a lot about judicial politics, and it was about Sonia Sotomayor. Apparently, she just gave a talk at the Radcliffe Institute where she was the featured speaker. And in the story, she reported the following, that often after the court delivers major opinions, she retreats to her chambers and cries and sheds actual tears. And those tears are, I suppose, in sorrow and in frustration over the decisions of her fellow jurists, many of whom are to the right of her. The court has a 6-3 majority, conservative majority, and Sotomayor is obviously not a member of that clique, as it were. But here's what interested me about her decision. She talked about why the tears, and she said that the decisions didn't reflect what she was looking for. Some of the decisions that she's wept over. And those decisions included a commitment to justice, a commitment to diversity, and a commitment to equity. And so I looked at that and I thought, well, okay, I know Justice Sotomayor. I've had dinner with her. I've argued in front of her many, many times when she was on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. I have a lot of respect for her and her biography, and the piece gave some information about her biography. She was raised by a single mother in the Bronx, and they didn't have money for books. They'd go through the trash bin looking for newspapers to read to get caught up on the news. Sonia was initially enthralled by the law by reading about the young fictional sleuth Nancy Drew, and she first wanted to be a police detective, and her mother encouraged her to do more. So she became a federal prosecutor, then a federal judge, then a district court judge, and now she's on the United States Supreme Court. But the thing that I found odd about the story is I don't regard Sonia Sotomayor as having a judicial philosophy that I can identify. And when she talks about going back to her chambers to cry about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I'm not sure what she's crying about. I can see in recent decisions a commitment to originalism. I can see in recent decisions a commitment to a robust view of federalism and the division of state and federal powers, nowhere so more than in Dobbs versus Women's Health. I can see tensions on the horizon in the area of substantive due process. And when I look back at books on constitutional interpretation, like Cass Sunstein's recent book on interpreting the Constitution, I see schools of thought that jurists turn to when it comes time to interpreting the majestic words of the Constitution. But I don't see a justice, diversity, and inclusion mantra. The closest I've seen to that is something that Sunstein, I guess, talks about in his book without articulating it all that well, and that is a jurisprudence of democracy enforcing norms. And so I felt bad for Sotomayor. Obviously, the prospect of another person's tears is never to be, welcomed with open arms, even if you're an adversary of them. But what I didn't see was a commitment to a robust view of a constitutional republic. And so I thought, how do I characterize Sonia Sotomayor? And I thought of her as a pragmatist without a portfolio. She's got her interests, she's got her views of the law, and she's got her opinions about how decisions should turn out. But if they're not rooted in a constitutional philosophy, if they're not rooted in a principled view of the text and how to interpret it, what are they rooted in? And I don't know if you saw the piece, Mike. I don't know if you have thoughts on it. I was just troubled by it.
I read it. I don't know why I don't know why New York Times is running this, and I don't know why she is talking in open public while serving as an active justice on the Supreme Court about her emotional temperament or infirmities behind closed doors. It's odd to me. You can feel how you want to feel, but what we don't know is, the emotional turbulence of one of the other justices. Clarence Thomas, will say, who's been under tremendous public scrutiny, who's been under fire, who's been investigated for all sorts of other stuff. It's just interesting to me that the New York Times running a puff piece on her moments of deep sadness in the background while she speaks at Harvard's Radcliffe Institute about what's going on in the Supreme Court. It wasn't too long ago that Sotomayor in open argument couldn't even grasp. You're talking about sort of the not having I guess a narrative of the republic, of the constitutional republic in which we live, or at least a coherent theme or track. I just remember this. Anytime her name is brought up, it's synonymous with this: that a justice of the Supreme Court was not impervious to misinformation that was being peddled by the very media that she now sits in front of, giving a puff piece about her closed-door sadness, right? These are the same institutions that peddled a lot of this. So, far be it from me to lack empathy. I think I'm a empathetic person by nature, probably why I react so harshly to this. But I don't know that I care insofar as equity is not something that's in the Constitution. And these issues of diversity have absolutely ruined our public discourse on what the promise of America is.
Well, I mean, she's entitled to her views, and I would have liked to have seen her refer to the book that she read that informed her interpretation of the Constitution, as opposed to her ad hoc sympathetic reaction to it. It was, I don't fault Harvard Radcliffe for having a justice up there. I mean, I've attended fora. I remember attending that many years ago. The Second Circuit Court of Appeals has a judicial conference every summer, and every other year they invite judges to invite lawyers to attend, and I'd been invited to attend. And there was Justice Ginsburg talking from the dais about her feelings about women's rights and her great passion. And I found it a little unusual as well. The look behind the robe to see the heart that's beating beneath the brain was a little too Oz-like for me. But yet the reaction of some of the justices there was downright orgasmic. Janet Arterton from the Connecticut District Court, she all but asked for Ginsburg's autograph and was giddy as she introduced her. So I think personality matters. I don't know that I'm going to watch the Sotomayor piece. I don't know if there is a book that summarizes her judicial philosophy. I was moved by it nonetheless, and somewhat depressed by it, because I think the action in the Supreme Court is determining what political philosophy animates the republic, and those political and philosophic commitments move decisions in one direction or another.
Right, but the court is being faced with challenges to the interpretation of the Constitution raised principally by one partisan spectrum within the country that she has a long time identified with. So again, I can find a million reasons to actually be put off by the fact that we're even reading about her sort of emotional, peaks and troughs as it relates to her position on the court. But she does have a position on the court, a lifetime appointment of one of the most respected institutions in the world, let alone the country. So I'm not going to cry for her tears.
Well, I wasn't saying I was crying. I was just interested in them, all right, well, let's move on. Friday, I got some interesting news from the Appellate Court, or Thursday, I guess, the Appellate Court. As you regular listeners know, in the Alex Jones case, I was suspended by the trial judge for a period of 6 months. And that related to my office's handling of confidential medical records in our possession. They've been deemed highly confidential and were to be shared only by counsel of record in the case. And if they were shared outside of that orbit, they had to be done with court approval, and presumably any sharing should have come with a great fanfare, great notice to the recipient that these were confidential. In the course of the proceedings, Free Speech Systems, one of Jones's entities, went into bankruptcy. And this was a hostile trial. I mean, the judge and I were at it continually. There were motions to recuse, emergency motions to the state Supreme Court, public interest appeals challenging various aspects of her rulings. A highly contentious trial. You can see snippets of it on YouTube, and extremely stressful. I mean, we joke around at home. I still have PTSD from that one. But at the end of the case, the court held a show cause hearing and concluded that because my office was in possession of files, that those files then went to bankruptcy counsel from Free Speech Systems, and from him to co-counsel or to counsel in a related interest in the Texas Sandy Hook cases. And in that office, the Texas office inadvertently gave them off to the adversaries, to the plaintiffs in that case, which made a national news, which made a national Perry Mason moment of it. Because of that, I was alleged to have been derelict in my professional responsibilities in honoring the orders of the court. And the court made a series of very hostile findings against me, including that I had intentionally violated an order of the court, that I was willfully in disobedience, and then lesser conclusions that my office had been careless, that I had not been careful in the supervision of my associates. The case came up on an unusual procedural posture. Although the court has inherent supervisory authority to supervise the conduct of lawyers appearing before it, the conduct that we engaged in didn't appear before the court. The court read about it in the newspaper and then held a hearing. So we took an appeal. We had to fight for the stay. Initially, the order was issued in early January, just as the jury selection in the Proud Boys case in DC was heating up. And for 7, 8, or 9 days, I was actually suspended from the practice of law. In Connecticut, my status in DC was up in the air because my admission in DC was contingent upon being admitted in a state court. And because I was not at that moment admitted in a state court, it was unclear whether I could participate in the Proud Boys case. The Appellate Court of Connecticut granted a stay while my office sought review of the order, and I was able to participate in the Proud Boys case. On January 2nd of this year, my office argued the appeal. We argued that procedurally it was an infirm proceeding. In other words, that the court should not have been able to proceed in the manner that it did. And we argued substantively that many of its findings, well, all of its findings, were wrong. As a matter of law, there were no rule violations. The appellate court split the baby, as appellate courts typically do. They rejected our procedural arguments and held that it was fine for the court to proceed in the manner in which it did. But then it substantively went on to say, I think there were 6 findings of professional misconduct. It vacated the three of them, the 3 more serious ones, and directed the case to go back to a different judge for new proceedings on the 3 counts that remained. And so, I appreciate the kind words of all of you who say, congratulations, you won. I think that's probably an overstatement at this point. I think we stopped the train in its tracks last week, and now a different conductor will be invited into the engine, and the train will begin to run again. Some have said, "Oh, you should be, dancing on you should be dancing on the rooftops and condemning the judiciary for this, act of antagonism toward a lawyer representing an unpopular man." If you notice a note of contrition in my voice, it is that I recognize the authority of the court to supervise lawyers. And if I erred in that case, there will be consequences. I don't think the errors that I committed warranted 6-month suspensions. And I know that I'll have to appear again in front of another judge, and perhaps not too far down the line from now, to give an account of conduct that was that at least one other judge found to have violated the rules. So it's not a time to celebrate. It wasn't a grand slam of a victory. I can tell you my state of mind was as follows. You get notice of a decision that it's going to be published the day before it does at 11:30. And so I'm never optimistic about what courts are going to do with respect to lawyers. So I packed up my car and headed out to the Cape, and was prepared for anything. And then along the way, my phone lit up and people were congratulating me on what amounts to a partial victory. My hope is that the court will think that the great amount of public commentary on this case was punishment enough. I mean, Google my name and you'll see Jones lawyer suspended for 6 months, and any number of prestige sites have heaped scorn and ridicule upon me without understanding the case, the nature of what happened, and perhaps without even reading the opinions. My hope is that will be enough, and we'll be able to resolve this case, if not with a handshake, with something nominal. So I appreciate all the goodwill and the good word out there. This fight is not over, and that phone call is going to go unanswered. But that's what happened Friday, and off we go to the next round.
So who's going to take the case over as a litigator for you in the as it goes back to the lower court?
So I had Chris DiMatteo in my office file the briefs and do the argument, and we kicked around. Chris DiMatteo is a young lawyer, oh gosh, he's probably in his 30s. Maybe he might even be 40. One of those guys, just a little wet behind the ears, plenty smart, but lacking some things. Just teasing, Mike. We had some thought about whether to take it to another lawyer who had, a little more gravitas within the disciplinary world. But I think the thinking is, right, stay on the horse you got. And he successfully argued the case before the appellate court thus far. I think a lot depends on which judge it gets reassigned to. There are certain judges in the disciplinary context that are known as hanging judges, and certain judges that aren't. And we will look with great interest to see who gets the assignment.
Well, just for some perspective, I think if you were the litigator here and your client had gotten the result that you got at the appellate court, I think that your tune would be a bit different. And I say that with all due respect and humility, that I recognize that there's still work to be done. But the fact that that Judge Barbara Bellis came to end your law career is should not be understated. I think she tried, in my view, she tried to kill you, and that was a move against you, your family, and those that depend on you, all of your clients. So, you have to forgive me for kind of fist pumping and saying that, yeah, for sure you won. And any of the remaining proceedings are not in any way, shape, or form, worst case scenario, going to exact the type of punishment and harm that upholding what she attempted to do would have done at the appellate court level.
Here's where we disagree. It's possible that the same result will obtain. It depends on the judge and what that judge's feelings are. Now, if it does, the door to the appellate court is wide open again. And if I were a litigator rather than a litigant, I probably would be dancing on the tops of burning cars. But I've been advised by wiser heads than mine that this is not a time for me to dance on car tops. It's time to show a little humility and a little respect for the institution.
I may have strong feelings. Keep going. That's what
I may have strong feelings about Judge Bellis and her handling of the Jones trial and her handling of me. But I remain an officer of the court, and I'm going to have to behave as such for the time being. Well, we're going to have closing arguments in Trump land this week. What do you expect, Mike?
I don't know. What I do know is that over the weekend, Trump appeared at the Libertarian National Convention and spoke there. Said that he would, if he was elected, he would pardon Ross Ulbricht. And the question of whether to pardon Assange remains. But that his campaign and his popularity as presidential candidate, I don't think has ever been higher than at this moment that we're speaking in, right? And I think he's strong. As far as what's going on with this case, I continue to think that there isn't really anyone with any with some modicum of understanding of the procedure and what is in theory supposed to be happening, can articulate what the underlying crime is that enhances this to a felony trial. And I would think that intuition, Norm, could be extrapolated to the jury. The Cohen testimony, certainly, depending on what outlets one was consuming information from, I think is going to be the decisive moment in this case. There have been many people who have said that, by that point in the case, juries typically have made up their mind and they're looking for argumentation and facts and stuff to sort of confirm their pre-existing conclusions. I just don't know that, and by the way, it's not lost on me that you and I pointed out 3 or 4 days before most of the political pundits did that Michael Cohen stole money from the Trump organization. I don't know why that hit last week as if it was a revelation. If you were listening to Law Pod Daily, as you should be every day, you would have heard that 3 or 4 days in advance and have been prepared for that conclusion. The fact that his testimony elicited that maybe was the news. As far as what I expect, I think the closing arguments are going to take quite a long time. I think that they're probably going to take all day. But I don't know.
Has the court imposed time limits on them?
Not to my knowledge. So it's possible that closing arguments could be. I don't know how you could, but again, here we are in Marshawn's world. So if anybody has any information as to court imposed time limits, please throw it in the chat.
Well, Mike, I can tell you my experience is that you never get unlimited time. That's a throwback to the Clarence Darrow era, when Darrow would argue sometimes for days on a point. For example, in the Leopold and Loeb case, I think his arguments were 9, 10, 11, 12 hours long, if I remember it. That's where he argued for sparing the lives of 2 young men who engaged in a vicious thrill kill. My experience is that without permission of the court, you are typically limited to no more than 1 hour. And, I've been in courts where the judges say, do you want me to give you a 5-minute notice? And then, when you're at 55 minutes, the court will say, you've got 5 minutes left, counsel. And so there is a premium on placing limits on the amount of time that a lawyer can argue. And it would be extraordinary for Marshawn to say these are unlimited in time.
Let's see. I'm going back to I'm over here on Rumble. Goodfella D is referring to the decision from the appellate court. Norm says this decision is bullshit. Who's going to sell my pencils now?
I might still be available, guys. Remember Dostoevsky facing the firing squad in Tsarist Russia. He was part of a group who was alleged to have, harbored radical sympathies against the Tsar. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. And so one day Dostoevsky was taken out to the firing squad and lined up, and men armed themselves preparing to shoot, and in rode the Tsar and commuted his sentence. This changed Dostoevsky's life. He became something of a religious believer and believed in second chances and so forth. I can't quite say that I had a Dostoevsky at the firing squad moment, but I can say that when I packed up my car to leave for the Cape Thursday, it was consistent with a set of plans on what I was going to be doing for the next 6 months. Obviously we would have taken an appeal to the Connecticut Supreme Court, and that would have bought some additional time. And in fact, an hour and a half from now, I will begin our evidence in a murder case for which the jury has already been selected. So I was relieved in the sense that I now don't immediately face those difficulties. But when I woke up this morning, I thought, oh, damn, I've got to go back to work. And, it's the workaday world of a lawyer, hustling a fee there, negotiating an outcome there, facing a hostile witness and a difficult judge there. And as always, tap dancing on the heads of many needles, all of which seeking to prick my foot and make me leave a bloody trail. the life of a trial lawyer may not be solitary, nasty, poor, brutish, and short, as Thomas Hobbes once said, but it sure as hell feels that way some days.
So what do you got for the Trump trial today and for this week? My expectation is that the jury is going to deliberate probably for at least a day. I think it's good that we're starting even in the short week. It's great that it's not over a weekend, right? That the jury isn't being sent to deliberate on a Friday, but who knows?
Yeah, I mean, my hunch is I watched Mike Smirkanish yesterday, and he thought that an acquittal was virtually impossible, that a conviction was likely, but a hung jury wouldn't surprise him. And he made a compelling case based on his observation of the jury that the government never proved the felony case. That is, it might be a misdemeanor to falsify a public record, that is, to claim something was a retainer when it was in fact a payment of hush money. But it only becomes a felony if it's done in furtherance of some of covering up some other breaking of the law. And the people of New York never put on evidence that this broke another law, the payment of hush money. And so if that's correct, Merchan should give a directed verdict as to the felony charges, leaving only the misdemeanor charges for Trump to face. And of course, that would be very good news for him because it's unlikely that he'd be sent to jail on a misdemeanor charge.
Yeah. And, we've had people asking, and Jules even asks here, the possible punishments for Trump if he is indeed found guilty. You just I think you already sort of answered that, but if there is a guilty verdict on a felony count, the prospect of jail time doesn't go away. But in a way, right now, I don't know that there's any lose. I think it's a win-win for Trump at this point still.
So let's include our readers in a discussion that we were having.
This is interesting too. I had read this like in passing. I didn't know if you knew this, Norm. 2 lawyers on the jury.
Yeah, we talked about that.
Okay. I still think that's fascinating, and I know we talked about it in my federal court case a couple of weeks back that we wanted to have a lawyer on the jury for very specific reasons. That's interesting. So anyway, go ahead.
So Mike and I have begun to have a debate about the ideological tone and direction of Law and Legitimacy. And Mike, I think, has detected a softening in my position, which he correlates with efforts that are succeeding to restore harmony in my home. My wife and I drifted apart politically and physically over the course of the pandemic and throughout the succeeding years, and have found our way back to one another and are renegotiating everything in our relationship, which is a good piece of good news. Mike wonders whether, however, that has led to a certain ideological softening on my part, where I'm now embracing the center for purposes of domestic peace to the expense of whatever it was whatever momentum we were building here. And I note that from certain of the comments, people are frustrated with what perceives to be a turn on my part. For example, my embrace and entertainment of the idea that there should be regulations on hate speech. And the example that I use in that is clearly I don't want to be walking across a town green where some knucklehead is screaming, "Kill Jews," while my wife is walking with me, who happens to be Jewish. And so, if you sense, folks listening, a certain ideological tension here, as Mike and I don't want to say drift apart ideologically, but begin more self-consciously to identify on different parts of the spectrum. I'm not sure that spells the end of Law and Legitimacy. I hope it doesn't, because my view about Law and Legitimacy is we all live in one republic, under one roof, as it were, that covers the continent. And the challenge in every household, in every community, and throughout the land is to find common terms and conditions for discussing our public debate. But because Mike and I raised it this morning in our private discussions, we didn't want to play hide the ball with you. It may be, and I hope it's not, that we've reached growing pains. And I hope Mike hasn't decided that I've become some moderate cop-out that he doesn't want to be associated with. Well, it may be that Mike has acquired a sufficient trajectory of his own. Maybe it's going to be the Mike Boyer show and I'm going to be back on my own someday. I'm hoping that's not the direction that things move in. But I wanted all of you to be aware that Mike and I are talking about what appears to be a growing, I don't want to call it an ideological.
Well, no, there is a fissure, but it's because you and I care for one another personally outside of this. And I think I made that clear to you this morning too, that, we could keep, and I'll take the blame for the delay this morning, because I think what I told you, Norm, is that we could keep them waiting for another week. It doesn't matter, provided that, the conditions for mine and you to continue with these conversations are productive. And just so that there's no one misconstrues this, Norm made the decision just now to bring this up, right? So we're not, this isn't something that we're doing for content in terms of, trying to engage. I just think I feel weird about that. It gets a little cringy. I care for Norm as a mentor, and perhaps more than that. When all is said and done, I think the most frustrating part of our relationship is the tech issues that persist. But I do think that we all live lives that are complicated and complex, and those are two very different things, right? And Norm has been brave from my perspective in allowing those of you that watch us and have been with us to go on a little bit of that journey into sort of the tumultuous nature of his private life. And I am much more guarded in that respect. I think I was raised that way, and I don't think that there's any issue on either side. But to the extent people come to expect certain things from us in terms of the level of discourse or the honesty, there was someone in here, and I believe, she's in here this morning, that was questioning whether we were basically bought and paid for in terms of the shift in Norm's opinions. It's categorically not true. There would have to be actual money involved for that to be the case. And we bootstrap this. We're up, we've been doing this for several years. And we don't have any sponsors. We do this because we want to, and because we are in pursuit of something intellectually and spiritually, I believe, certainly culturally. And my perspective on where we are as a show, and Norm, just so you hear this, your recent turn is that perhaps I yearn for the sort of inner peace it requires to be as optimistic and unified as you are. But I just certainly don't think culturally that the preconditions for that sort of stability have been met.
But can we create them? Can we help create them?
But I'm just making sure that you know that I'm not hostile for the sake of being hostile, or contrarian for the sake of being contrarian. It is my observation that while I want to get to what you are talking about, and that perhaps you are further along that road, or perhaps more prepared for that road, my memory is strong and very clear. And anybody that knows me knows just how granular my memory is. And I have not forgotten a lot of the excesses of our political betters over the last 5 to 6 years. And so it's hard for me to resolve that we would be entertaining something like an exception to the First Amendment for hate speech when the context and the levers of power have not shifted. Culturally, we have not shifted, that those preconditions for us even being able to, in good faith, entertain what you're talking about have not been met, and that there are those that would exploit that to the end of our republic, in my view, just taken to the logical extreme.
No, and you may be right, and we may be at the end of the republic. I mean, again, we started with the commitment to the concepts of law and legitimacy, and to pondering the question that Cicero posed. What is a republic? A republic isn't any group of people randomly assorted. It's people who share common interests and common conceptions of right. And so throughout the years, we haven't so much debated the interest issue. We've left that aside, but we've debated common conceptions of right. We've talked about diversity. We've talked about we've talked about the bottom falling out of pluralism. We've talked about the excesses of identity politics. We've talked about all the things that have pulled us apart. And from time to time, we've taken sides on the ideological division and pushed things in one direction or another. I just have increasingly come to the conviction that there's more to be gained pressing toward a center, and that maybe rather than talking about ideological divisions, we should talk about common interests and challenge folks to reconsider their ideals. I've started to listen to a fascinating book.
Sorry, Anonymous brings this up, and this is something that I also sort of in my diatribe just now neglected to bring up. But we've talked about immigration, and we've talked about Camp of the Saints, right? and these issues, to me, these issues that we have raised remain unresolved. And just because we have made our way through them intellectually a couple of times does not mean that the rest of society is devoid of those excesses. So sorry, Norm.
Well, and I mean, Anonymous, you make a great point. What do you think the views of the 13 newest arrivals are regarding the Republic? I doubt they have mature views regarding the Republic. I suspect their views are more quotidian, that it's closer to the ground, closer to survival, closer to putting food on their family's table, getting their kids educated, and sharing the minimum conditions of a decent life. The question, I think, for us is, what do we think of them? Do we think that because they haven't arrived legally or lawfully that they should be expelled from the country, and that their ordinary desires for a better life should be ignored because they aren't members of our republic? And if so, what are the conditions of membership of the republic? How does one become a member? And what is the commitment to equality? And how are we going to respond to the immigration crisis?
A long time ago, Norm, you said that you weren't sure that the Constitution didn't need some sort of update or need to be rewritten, or perhaps it had outlasted itself. And we as a society needed something new. I'm looking at some of these comments, in particular Dawn's. She says, "What is the center as an idea? It seems vacuous in this context." And context is important. And I would tend to agree. I think that there's some sort of pictorial illustration in one's mind when you say the center of anything, right? The center of the political paradigm. But I think that belies the facts that attend to us today as citizens in the United States, and what the center really is not pictorially symmetrical, I think, right? Whatever the center is again some common vision of the good, and you and I are working on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm open to the possibility that it needs to be discussed. I started to mention moments ago, starting to listen over the weekend to a book called Sedition Hunters. And it's about the lay citizens who've made it their work to identify those who have participated in the Capitol riots on January 6th. And so it's a left-leaning account of a world that I have inhabited as a rightward-leaning litigator. And so I chose to listen to the book to see what I could learn about how others viewed events that I was deeply involved in. And candidly, I'm finding it to be a very, very fascinating and responsible read. I can't or listen. I'm in chapter 5 now. I'll get to the author later. But I am making it a point to read outside of my comfort level, because the easy thing would be to go from here and to click onto Dan Bongino or what's that, Ben Shapiro, or some other denizen of the right who has established traction, got clicks, and now has a series of followers because it knows how to appeal to its base. I'm not looking to appeal to a pre-existing base, because my view is that politics are divided, and deeply so. And I'm very, very concerned about how the 2024 election will be conducted and how its results will be received. And rather than reliving the 2020 conflict in old ideological terms, I'd like to acquire a different set of glasses, a different prism, to watch 2024 to see if we can build something better. I don't want to sound like Joe Biden, build back better. I guess that was his thing. I don't know. I never knew what it meant. But so, Mike, you and I, it may be that there'll be some more friction between the two of us, but I welcome it. Because we're two people of goodwill who inhabit the same space, not just here online on law and legitimacy, but as practicing lawyers in a republic committed to the rule of law. And I think we have leadership positions as lawyers, and we have a responsibility to model responsible and respectful discourse, debate, and to identify areas where we disagree, and then not simply insist on the disagreement, but ask what can be done about the disagreement. So those of you who have perceived a moderating tone in me, yeah, you're right, it's there. I've walked 5 years with the radical right, ranging from Alex Jones to the Proud Boys to Nick Fuentes and others. And at the end of that journey, I ended up with certain perspectives about how far that narrative can constructively be pressed. And the answers won't delight all of you. They'll surprise some of you. and they'll please others of you. And so my view is that we're talking ourselves in this country off of a cliff. When we get to the bottom of it, we may be unhappy that we can't climb back to the top. And I'd rather avoid the descent if I can.
Understood. Well, much more content today than I think most bargained for on this short week, Tuesday morning. Lots of activity in the chat, and I am always very appreciative of how active our community is, small though it be. It is mighty. So thank you to all of you. And Norm, I think, thank you for giving me the room to express certain frustration, both privately, but also to follow it up here, and at least communicate some sense of what's happening, because I think different seasons for every part of life, and you and I have known each other long enough now that we are not, I think, rigidly bound to a concept of one another that was formed years ago and then may exist in that sort of permafrost ad infinitum like most people. We do have an evolving relationship because we've known each other that long and we speak to each other every day and we know things about one another. And perhaps, perhaps a sign of my own insecurity is thinking that, you taking a walk intellectually and philosophically somewhere that departs from where we've been, is somehow going to undermine what we do.
No, what it's going to do is it's going to invite you to take a turn, and you're going to say, "Oh,
that's why
we're down to something here."
That's why I called it insecurity, right? I said perhaps part of my own insecurity is thinking that could be the case, but I think that perhaps this gives additional freedom to both of us. So as we push forward, I think I'm fine looking for the pragmatic, more utilitarian. What does it mean? But I don't want to do that without people understanding exactly what's going on and attributing or maligning our intent or the posture of this stream or this show, or questioning the authenticity of the views or opinions that are being expressed. They're all genuine, right? And that was becoming an issue, and that's ultimately what led to our discussion, Norm, is that
well, and that's interesting to me because I mean there is a sense online where you can go to a silo, and if you want to hear, if you want something predictable, I mean, like Bob Barnes, whom I had some limited experience with, Bob occupies a bombastic part of the internet, and you know what you get when you go to see Bob, and that's fine. If you don't know what you're going to get when you come to see us, I think that's better. Because what we're doing is we're looking at a world that is wide open with possibilities and reconsidering not only our own views and the views that we've historically taken, but views which you may have taken. Because like it or not, there are a wide diversity of opinions in the United States, and politics reflects them. And in the 2024 season, I intend to spend as much time as I can looking around the edges at the right, at the center, at the left, and identifying what's good in each center with the idea of stitching together a different version of politics, a different vision of politics in the United States. Because I think that send it around buying Norma ring light. I have one. It's just a question of plugging it in. My sense is that politics don't work in the United States right now, and I am committed, and I think Mike is committed to making them work. Now, it may be that we don't work together from time to time. That Mike looks at me, he's like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And I look at Mike saying, "Get your head out of your ass." That's an okay response to have to one another in the marketplace of ideas. The response not to have is to say, "Oh, these guys have been bought and paid for by the deep state. Oh, the CIA must be underwriting them," or to adopt some irresponsible conspiracy narrative rather than using your own eyes, your own ears, and your own head. Think for yourself, folks. You get one noggin. Use it or lose it.
Yeah, Justin, you said make sure super chats are on next time. I wasn't aware that they had been turned off.
What are they?
Super chats are when people give us money, Norm, tipping.
Super chat. Yes, super chat.
So I'll look into that, Justin. Our apologies, but I didn't do anything special for the first time that you left super chats, but we did have to I guess re-emerge into monetization by buying through AdSense and verify identity and all that kind of stuff last week. So there may be some sort of delay within the system, although our streams are at least monetized again as of late last week. Anyway,
All right.
let's see. Yeah, I mean, we could stay here all day. And I was, maybe we should do a Q&A at some point this week, Norm. We haven't done that.
Maybe tomorrow. Let's do a Q&A tomorrow, because if people have questions, we have answers. I mean, look, Mike and I missed a couple days last week, part of the holiday. And then Mike sent me a note this morning and suggested that, there was a little friction in the air. So we started to talk about it. I think there's a lot of friction in the air. I mean, not just on this show and in the United States. And if I could have Mike, I don't know if Mike shares this, but if my view of law and legitimacy is, it becomes a centrist view. It becomes a place where forum. It becomes a place where people can come to test the validity of ideas from right, left, and center, and engage in a meaningful discussion to see what works and what doesn't. Because I just don't think I don't think the political system's working right now. But I know damn well I want my roads to work, and I know damn well I want my.
I was going to say the political system is working. It's just about who it's working for.
All right, let's talk about that.
So yeah, the political system is working just fine as it has been designed and it has been curated. But there are many tens of millions of us, perhaps hundreds of millions of us, that would recognize one day that it has been rigged appropriately, such that it's only working for a select few. You are grown men. Even worse, both lawyers. Of course, there's friction. We'll end on that. Let's do a Q&A tomorrow. And then just because he's demonstrating his status as an OG, Jackson Barrett says start on time at 7:45 a.m. instead of 8:06. Do you remember when we used to start at 7:45, Norm?
I don't actually.
I do. I remember when we actually moved it to 8, and it was a huge relief. We actually used to start the show at 7:45 a.m. So that's not the real start time. It's still 8 a.m. Anyway, Norm, good to talk to you. Good to see everybody in the chat. Welcome to the short week. We'll be back tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time, right here at Law Pod Daily. Make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't liked this video, what are you doing? Like the video. Leave a nice comment. You can also find the audio-only versions of this stream on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Play, Overcast, wherever you find premium podcasts. Norm, what do you got?
AMF, yo-yo.
AMF, yo-yo. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Bye, Norm.